And welcome to our Wednesday night Bible study on biblical Christian ethics. We're going to finish up this particular section that everybody always looks forward to, divorce and remarriage. It's sad that you have to talk about divorce. God's not happy with divorce, but God also takes into consideration the fact that it does happen because of the evilness of people's hearts. In my years of pastoring, I have come across more people, they'll do anything possible to have a divorce. They don't want to live together. They don't want to solve the problem. They want out, no matter what. And that's sad. That's tragic to see people going down that road. People are hurt for a lifetime as a result of that. The spouses are hurt. The children, if there are children involved, they're hurt. They're affected all negatively for a lifetime. Well, anyway, let's look at some final words in regards to this subject matter. Sometimes lost in the debate over the exception clause is the fact that whatever marital unfaithfulness means. Everybody's got their own definition these days, you know. Okay, it is an allowance for divorce, not a requirement for it. And that's one of the interesting things to realize, that just because the bill of divorce was given to Moses, and there was an allowance there for divorce, but because of the hardness of their hearts, God gave that to them. Not because God wanted to make it easy, but simply because they weren't going to pay attention to anything else. And that's a sad and tragic affair that we have that today as well. Yeah, but it's not a requirement. You don't have to divorce. Even when adultery is committed, a couple can, through God's grace, learn to forgive and begin rebuilding their marriage. God has forgiven us of so much more. Surely we can follow His example and even forgive the sin of adultery. Ephesians 4:32. And that's a fact. Everybody's a sinner. There is no such person that is born of Adam's race that is not a sinner. We were conceived, the Bible says, in sin. You know, we didn't have a vote in it. We could say, well, I don't want to be conceived in sin. That's just the way it was, because of the corruption dating all the way back to the Garden of Eden. So we're all sinners. We all need God's forgiveness, every single one of us. And we need to forgive those who've sinned against us. Family members, friends, co-workers, neighbors, brothers, nieces, nephews, fathers, mothers, and so on. We need to learn to forgive. And it seems that's a very hard thing for some people to do. But the way to learn how to forgive is, number one, look at your own sinful heart, honestly. And then look at the fact that God offers you forgiveness for all sin. And if you have received Christ, you've acknowledged to Him that you're a sinner. You know that you're a sinner. You know there's nothing you could do to remove sin, to take it away. It's there. Only God can take it away through the sacrifice of His Son. It is the only sacrifice, the sacrifice of His Son on the cross of Calvary, that can actually take sin away. And you and I who believe, who've turned from our sin and turned to Jesus. We've put our faith, trust, hope, and reliance on Jesus to save us. We've received Him. We've committed ourselves to Him. Our sin is gone. It is taken away 100%. It's hard for us to understand that, because even though in our current body that is corrupted by sin, with an old sinful nature still there, along with the new nature that God has given to us, that old sinful nature acts up every now and again. And we somehow kind of look at that sin as something that's new. It's not. It's old, and it's already paid for, and it's already been taken away. Now, some people want to use that as an excuse to say, well, since God has taken all the sin away, past, present, and future, I can just live any way I want to. That attitude immediately tells you this: that person has never been born again. That's exactly what it tells you. Because God changes your mind and your heart and your desires when you're born into the kingdom. You may sin as a Christian, but you don't want to. You are grieved when you sin, and you're aware that you have sinned. You grieve about that. And you ask the Lord to cleanse you of this. He has already done that. But this, your confession to Him, renews the fellowship that is broken, not because God went away, but because we became convicted of sin that has already been paid for by Jesus. And we should never have dabbled with it to begin with. The more you learn about sin, and the more you learn what God has done to take it away, and the more that you learn about what God expects us to do, consider that old nature dead. Don't let it have its say in life. When you came to Christ, the power of sin was broken. You no longer, as a Christian, have to sin. You may, but you're going to grieve about it, and you're going to strive not to do it anymore. And when justification and the work of justification and sanctification and glorification are fully completed in each one of us, the good work that Jesus has begun in us, we'll be totally free forever. And what a day that's going to be when we see Jesus, because then it's all taken care of by then. All right. Many also look quickly to remarry after a divorce when God might so desire them to remain single. God sometimes calls people to be single so that their attention is not divided. 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verses 32 through 35 speaks of this fact, that when you get married, you have a responsibility. A husband has responsibility now for a wife and children when they come along, and a wife has responsibility to her husband also when children comes along. Time, energy, and effort that is spent on the family. And that's acceptable to God. But it also takes you away from being available to be more aggressive in ministry. The Apostle Paul was a Pharisee. And he was probably a member of the Council of the 70, the supreme ruling force under Roman law that was permitted in Israel. He was on that council. One of the qualifications for getting on that council, you had to be married. So we know that Paul was married at some point in time. He became a Christian. Never once does he mention his wife. Never once does he tell us what happened, where she's at, or anything. So far as anything that we could come up with would be a speculation or a guess. Paul never remarried. He lived as a single man. His wife may have died. His wife may have become a Christian and rejected Paul and left him. That was a possibility. We just don't know. Just do not know what took place or what happened there. Scripture's totally silent on it. Again, we can end up with speculation on that. Remarriage after a divorce may be an option in some circumstances, but that does not mean it is the only option. We do have the ability to make some other choices in regards to these matters, depending upon each situation and circumstance. All right. The Bible makes it abundantly clear as we conclude this whole matter of divorce and remarriage. The Bible makes it abundantly clear that God hates divorce. Malachi 2:16. Literally, that's the wording. And that reconciliation and forgiveness should mark a believer's life. Luke chapter 11, verse 4, Ephesians 4:32. However, God recognizes that divorce will occur even among His children. A divorced and or remarried believer should not feel any less loved by God, even if the divorce and or remarriage is not covered under the possible exception clause of Matthew 19:9. Sin is a terrible thing, and we live in the world filled with sin and sinners, and each one of us, even as a true believer, still has that old sin nature within us. And thank God it's destined for extinction. And that occurs in two particular cases. If you physically die as a Christian, at the moment that your spirit departs the body, the old nature perishes. Only the new nature will enter into the presence of Jesus. The old nature perishes immediately. And of course, the body deteriorates and goes back to the elements from which it was made. At the rapture, that one generation of Christians that is alive when the rapture takes place, they will be instantly changed into a glorified body like Jesus' resurrected body. And at that very instance of that change, the old nature will perish. It cannot again enter into the presence of the Lord. And so, these are things that we have to look forward to. But let us as believers move on from failures. Let's don't get hung up on those. Let's move on from those. It's easy to try to play the blame game. Am I at blame, or is the other one at fault? I have found through the years, mainly, that in a divorce situation, things that leads to a divorce, there is a percentage on both partners in regards to the cause of that divorce. Nobody is 100% innocent of that. It is a joint effort. It may appear that one person does it all on their own, but there are other extenuating circumstances. But we need to move on from those things. We cannot go back and pick up the toothpaste and put it back in the tube. You can't do that. You can't go back and change anything. What we need to do is move on in Christ and claim the victory that we have in Jesus. And realize that when the work of God, sanctification, glorification, justification, all this is completed, the divorce will be as if it never was. It'll be as if it never was. Because, again, it is sin. And that's not going to be in heaven. We're not going to remember that in heaven or anything of that nature. So let's just move on and realize that God has forgiven us and trust Him. And daily seek to be closer to the Lord and to grow in His grace daily. All right, the next thing that we want to get into is everybody's subject. They all like this. The Christian's responsibility in the economic sphere or order. In the world we live in, it takes money. It takes the economy. And it's necessary to sustain life and health and body and soul. It's necessary. But though that it is necessary, we are not at liberty to make it our God. And I think that probably the most profound God that is in any culture is money. And even in the American culture, we talk about the almighty dollar. By the way, that's not true. It's not almighty. The current status of your dollar today is actually worth 14 cents. 14 pennies. Well, what happened to the rest of it? It has been devoured by this thing called inflation. And inflation is motivated by twin brothers: greed and covetousness. And it just goes out of control. And unless we get our heads screwed down straight and start making some other decisions and backing away from this, instead of increasing the price of goods and services, let's reduce the price of goods and services. Oh, we can't do that. That's only an appearance. Greed and covetousness motivates us to reach out to grab as much as we can grab, hold on to as much as we can. And before we know it, we're bowing down and we're worshiping the almighty dollar. The lesson of 1929 should have taught a lot of people a lot of things. When the stock market began in the 1920s to go from kind of like this to like this, and just kept going, everybody wanted to get a piece of the action. And even more so when the people in the stock market trade came up with this idea of selling stock on margin. Let's sell it on margin. We're going to get more people to invest. Sounded like a good idea. And they used the term, invented the term margin. And the reason why they invented that term, because, well, pretty much people were afraid of debt. And though the Bible does not call debt a sin as such, it's not a debt, it's not a sin to borrow money. But the Bible does teach it's unwise to borrow money, because very quickly things can go out of control. So the culture, particularly in America in those days, before the crash in 1929, before the stock market was in the early part of the 20th century, and things looked like it could go on forever. We're all going to be wealthy. You could buy it, as they called, on margin. What you were doing was buying on credit. You were establishing debt. If you had a dime, you could buy $1 worth of stock in the early part of the 20th century. That meant you owed 90 cents. That was the debt you had incurred. And of course, the stockbrokers laughed that off. They said, listen, within a week, the stock market will go high enough that you will get that 90 cents and more returned to you. And then you could turn around and reinvest it again. And that's what a lot of people did. Individuals did it. Businesses did it. Corporations did it. Banks did it. And it looked like we got the goose that has the golden egg. We just keep doing this. On paper, not cash in hand, but on paper, ordinary people turned into millionaires overnight. And things just seem to be going really smooth. It's going up. It's going up. The sky is the limit. And then 1929, due in part because of things being bought on margin, a payday someday had to come. And the stock market went from this to this. And millionaires were broke. And many of them committed suicide. The reason why they committed suicide was not only did they lose their dime for every dollar of stock they bought, they still owed 90 cents on all that stock they bought that they didn't pay. They invested it in buying more stock. He was buying paper that ultimately became worthless. And it crashed. And many people learned that you can't live like that. But those generations that learned that lesson died off pretty quickly. And the newer generations never experienced any of that. They heard about it, they read about it, they didn't understand what all happened anyhow. And that we're all concerned about what's going on now. America, financially, economically, has been borrowing and borrowing and borrowing and borrowing. We are being taught and have been taught for decades. If you want to succeed and end up the end of your life with a good nest egg, everything is paid for, plenty of money to live till you retire and die, that can be fought over, although they don't say that, but fought over by your heirs, that your family will be able to divide all that up and enjoy that. But you must invest. And so investment is going on. Borrowing for this and borrowing for that. It reached a point that it was taught in many places, and I heard it any number of times. You can't get ahead unless you borrow money. You got to borrow for investment. You got to borrow to buy this, that, or the other, and mature it so that it grows. The problem is you got to pay the debt. The average American individual today has a going credit of $8,000 on their credit card. Have you looked at the recent interest rate? Around 28% for credit card debt. And all that you put on debt is gone. You've used that up. You say, well, I bought this, that, or the other. What did you buy? Well, I bought a pair of jeans. Well, when did you buy that? Well, I bought those out 4 years ago. You still wearing them today? Oh, no, they wore out. Yeah. Well, that just illustrates how it happens. And as such, debt drives inflation. Here's how that works. If you're living on cash and you got $100 in your pocket and you go into a store, you don't have a credit card. You don't use a credit card. You may have it, but you don't use it. You go into the store, your credit card's at home, and you have it there for an emergency use as such. But anyway, you go into the store, and you got $100 in your pocket. When you've spent all that $100, you can't spend any more. You spent cash. It's paid for. Next month, it doesn't come back to haunt you. Oh, I got to pay that. Oh, I don't have that kind of money this month. Credit card companies go, hooray! Bingo, 28% interest kicks in. Well, I avoided that. I spent my $100. If you have a credit card, the studies show that the average person will not stop at $100. If that's they may intend to not spend any more than $100. But if you have the credit card, the average person will spend $130, $30 more. And very quickly that gets out of control. Now, if you have a credit card, use it. But pay it off when the statement comes. Discipline yourself not to spend what you don't have. So anyway, this is just to show you as we begin to look start to look at this whole matter of Christians' responsibility in the economic area. We Christians are not to have idols in our lives. Credit can become an idol. And you don't believe that? When you can't pay that monthly statement, you are being controlled by debt. And that's to set the stage for it to becoming a god in your life.